Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Small Town Music. Today we are talking about, I think I titled the episode "Learn Your Rules." If you remember, if you're an Office fan, Dwight's little ditty about learning your rules or getting eaten in your sleep. But kind of what to prioritize in those first few weeks of teaching, where you're kind of hitting the ground running. You have some kind of concert music performance, whatever coming up that you need to prepare for. But what do we try to focus on and again, like kind of going back to that syllabus shock, like, oh my gosh, I have to teach everything. So what do we start with?
So, especially, well, I say especially, it really doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how old your students are, whatever level you're at, they need to know, and they're going to feel most comfortable if they know what to expect when they come in your classroom. They're going to create more freely. They're going to be more open and honest, as we're trying to create that community, and they need to know that they are in a safe space where they know what to expect. And the way that we do that is through procedures. I tend to call them procedures rather than rules. I know that's kind of the cool thing to do now. But, that could be everything from, with my high school choir, all right, as soon as you come in, you grab your folder out of the folder slot, you come in and you find your seat and do what? Like that being a safe, that being a procedure. What do we do when I'm rehearsing with another section? What's your job then? What's that procedure look like? With my elementary kids, it's, we enter quietly and find our seat. And we have to practice that. So the first month, like August for me, especially in elementary, is we're practicing that. Like, if they come in and they're loud and they're messing around, like, nope, let's go line back up, and we're gonna practice it again. And we may practice 5 times lining up at the door and walking in quietly, but it's that important that they get that foundation of, they know what is expected, they know that I'm going to hold them to those expectations, that I'm not going to let them just get away with doing whatever they want. That they have the set procedure in mind. Like, what do we do when it's someone else's turn to talk? What do we do when we sing solos in class? Like, what am I doing while someone else is doing that? So we're just practicing all those things. When we're listening to music, we're keeping the beat. When the music is on, our voices are off. All of those little procedures. And that's really, I remember in college, classroom management was always the biggest thing. And I remember our professors being like, well, if you plan your lesson well, then, like, you won't have classroom management issues.
That's a lie.
It's a half truth, because it's true that if you plan well, if you have set up your classroom in a way, strategically, if you don't allow for downtime, if you are prepared, these are all things that help. I think the thing that takes that to the 75% mark is those procedures, is they know what to expect. We were just talking about how the great thing about procedures is that it's very easy to know when they're broken, and when you know what's going to happen and they know what's going to happen, it takes the emotion out of it.
Yeah, I really liked that, of like taking the emotion out of discipline.
Because I remember in my early years, just being literally moved to tears by a few classes with the discipline issues, that I was just so frustrated with them, and they weren't on their best, I wasn't on their best, we were just yelling, crying, it was bad, guys. Oh man. So if that's you now, know that you're in good company.
It'll get better, I promise.
But the biggest thing is figuring out what you expect. And what's interesting is we'll both kind of talk here, but we actually handle things kind of differently in our classes. So why don't you go ahead and talk about some of the things that you've tried, and then I'll counter that.
Yeah, I think in college, and you guys have so many resources available to you that even when I was in college were not available. But there's Instagram teachers, and there's TikTok teachers, and there's YouTube teachers and podcast teachers, and everybody's kind of bombarding you with like, this is what I do and this is a great system. Just remember, like, feel free to try things out. If it doesn't work, it's not your fault. It's not because you're bad at teaching. It's because it's just not going to work for you. It was my first year teaching, and I went to a really great professional development day that the State Music Education Association put on. And there was a really awesome professor talking about a check system. And she laid it out really clearly, and it automatically sold, like, sign me up, let's do this. And it can be really good if you're the type of person that can handle that. Mentally, I could not do that. I would do the checks, but I would not follow through, because it's like, first check is a warning. Okay, that's fair. Second check was, so you have the warning. So second check was something like, you sit out of an activity, or I think even with high school, I made you like wait to go last, to leave the class last to go to lunch or something. Or like during COVID, it was like, I make you clean all your section mates' chairs. And then third check was I give a lunch detention, or like I tell if it's elementary, I like told the teacher. Then fourth check was you go to the office. And then like the idea was it reset every day. And it was, for me, like looking back, it was just, there were too many steps. There were too many things I had to remember. There were too many things I had to keep track of in the middle of trying to teach and moving through the classroom, because with discipline, you don't want it to take your whole class time. And it can be really easy, that kid's talking out again, like, and you are just constantly, your attention is being diverted, which is kind of what the kid wants, whether he knows it or not. They know it. But it was just too much. So I generally don't have too many discipline problems. I think because part of it too is just like the kids know me by now. Like, I'm not a stranger, I'm not a new person. They're not like pushing their limits with me. And like, let's be honest, especially with ensemble classes, like they choose to be in those classes. So there's going to be less discipline problems, because usually band choir orchestra is a fun place to be in that they chose to be. So you're going to have less discipline problems. Even elementary music, you see them once a week, and that's a break from their regularly scheduled class time that they get to like maybe play games, and maybe it's not their most favorite activity to come to music class, but it's still something different that they don't have to like sit and do worksheets.
Yeah.
But I found like the simpler the better. There's like a scene I know I keep referring to The Office, that's what I'm binging on Netflix right now, or Peacock or whatever. But there's a scene where Dwight is talking about his demerit system to Jim, and he's like, yeah, well, that's like the incentive program, but then like his demerit, like Jim walked in late, so he gave him a demerit. If you get 3 demerits, you get a distadulation. I don't know. It's like this whole, it's a hilarious bit, but that's what it feels like explaining these discipline systems sometimes that you hear about. It's just like, well, if you do this, but like really just the kids got to get in trouble, and then they'll stop. I had a lot of luck with the first time a kid was like talking. Obviously there's stipulations. If a kid is like setting something on fire in the back of the classroom, then like automatic straight to the office. Like, right. Oh, you started a fist fight? Let's call the principal and maybe the SRO, and we're gonna remove you from the situation.
We're gonna address this.
But like Johnny, little imaginary Johnny is talking when I'm trying to explain something. Okay, like, hey Johnny, stop. That's a warning. The second time, I then write their name on the board, and they get a lunch detention. And this is for middle school, high school. For elementary, I would notify their teacher at the end of class, And then if they're just continuing to disrupt class where I have to call them out and to stop my time, then yeah, you're going to go to the office at some point. And this is an important distinction because it's also documenting all these things that are happening. I am not very good at documenting the little things, so that when I blow up at a kid because I just cannot take it anymore, I've reached my breaking point, then there's no documentation of well, this has been building up, and it is now reached its breaking point. So the parents are well, what do you mean my kid's doing this? You've never mentioned this before. So number one, documenting, and number two, that typically once they get a lunch detention, then they know you mean business, and they usually stop. Not always, but I have found that once their parents get notified and I bring principals into it, at least at our school, in my situation with the kids that I have been fortunate enough that they stop. Usually if a kid is continuing to act out, there is an underlying reason to that as well. And sometimes you need to sit that kid down and just say hey bud, why are we choosing this right now? What's going on? Do you understand why this is a problem? And how can I help you fix this? And that's a really important connection to make, especially with those kids that are slightly problem kids. They're the ones that are going to talk out of turn or make funny jokes or whatever. But making that connection can really be helpful too.
There's a book called Teaching with Love and Logic. I did my student teaching with a wonderful music educator, and he turned me onto that book, and he was the perfect model of this, because it's the idea that I'm going to focus more on the good than on the bad. And especially if you teach elementary, I would really recommend this, but it works for all ages, really. It's the idea that, let's say that whoever this Johnny kid is that we keep picking up, that imaginary Johnny.
Or Jane.
Yeah, sure. Susie. Yeah.
Or student X.
Sure. As they're hanging upside down in their chair, as they do. Instead of Johnny, sit up. Susie, sit up. Instead of that, but Tommy sitting next to Johnny is sitting up and paying attention. Praise Tommy instead of yelling at Johnny. Don't even mention Johnny. Johnny gets no attention for what he's doing right now. Oh my goodness, Tommy, thank you so much. You are doing a fantastic job of sitting up in our chair like we do in music class. Thank you so much for that. And now that Tommy has got that positive attention, I'm telling you, 75% of the time, Johnny's going to sit up in his seat too. And when he does, you bring attention to it. Oh my goodness, Johnny, thank you so much for sitting up tall in your seat. And it might seem facetious to you. You might hear me say that and be like, wow, she sounds okay. But I'm telling you, the kindergartner who's getting praised for sitting up in their seat correctly, especially since that's the kindergartner that's probably gotten yelled at all day long for all the things that they did wrong, will pay attention, and you have built a greater sense of trust.
Every once in a while, there is a kid who's smart enough and who's been through that before to call you out.
Sure. There's always exceptions to the rule. But I'm telling you, I became a happier person when I started looking for the good instead of looking for the bad. And it made a huge difference in just how I manage my classroom.
I think that works really well for elementary. I think for middle school, high school, not as much. I really found a lot of luck with that, writing the first name on a board. And number one, it was really easy for me to just turn around and put, Susie or whatever, or, student name, and just keep going. Because then, every other kid is instantly quiet. It took 3 or 4 seconds to marker. And then every other kid is I
think there's also something to again with those kind of quick things is if you want to flip that around on the positive side, is like, I don't know how y'all feel about like candy and stuff like that, but I've absolutely done this though, that like there's, 15 out of the 20 kids are being crazy, but those 5 kids are on task. I have totally been known to like grab a piece of candy out of my podium and just like toss it to them, and they're like, suddenly everyone knows about that. Like, I want candy. Well, they were on task.
Well, make a better choice.
And
so the actions to our consequences.
And if I don't have candy, sometimes it's just a high five.
Right.
Like, and I'll do that even with my middle school kids. Like, other kids are doing it, I'll just go up and be like, thanks for being on task. I appreciate you.
Yeah, I notice if I'm like, oh, thank you so-and-so for, like, you're doing such a great job today. Like, thank you so much. If I'm like giving praise to that kid that truly is like working hard, and I'm like, hey, I recognize you and you're doing exactly what you're supposed to be doing when everyone else is not. The other kids will be like, oh, I don't care. I'm like, oh. Yeah, but deep down they do care. Yeah. They really do.
Yeah. And the trick to the positive praise is you almost have to keep an eye out, so those kids that more often than not maybe are off task find the time that they are. Like, you almost have to keep a closer eye on them, because it's like, holy cow, like they did something right, and they did something right away, they did something on task, like they're on it. Like, as soon as you see it, like, don't wait, because 30 seconds from now they might be off task again. Yep. Oh my goodness, I saw like how quickly you did that, thank you. Hey, let's do that again. Let's all do it as fast as, like, I always give my like stand up, sit down hand signals, so I don't have to be like, all right, let's stand. I can just, that's another one of those procedures that we practice. Yeah. Kind of going back to where we started this episode. Like, we practice, and I do this with all of my ages. Just the stand up, sit down, and it means to quietly stand and quietly sit. And if we talk, nope, we're going to do it again. Nope, we're going to do it again. And that's something we constantly are practicing to help with those transitions. But yeah, maybe it's like Johnny was the first one up, and like, hey, that was Johnny, amazing. Hey, let's do it again. Let's all do it as quickly and quietly as Johnny just did it. And bringing that. And so we're kind of practicing and praising at the same time.
I notice my class that happens at the very end of the day is the worst behaved.
I had first grade at the end of the day last year. That was so great.
For so many reasons. Number 1, you are tired and exhausted and done. Mm-hmm. Number 2, the kids have sat on their behinds all day in front of a Chromebook, in front of worksheets, listened to a teacher talking. Mm-hmm. Now, they've had lunch and recess. Depending on the time of year, they probably smell bad.
They're exhausted.
They're exhausted.
By the end of the day. And especially at the beginning of the school year, because they've been used to staying up way too late and getting up way too late, and now they're exhausted.
So, like, whatever it takes. I usually have my prep hour right before the end of the day, which is a blessing and a curse. Because, like, my brain shuts down, and I'm like, oh, we're done. No, we're not done. So you have to make a real extra effort to, like, those kids need as much structure and discipline as possible.
Yeah, if not
and more. Procedure. Like, same exact thing every single time. Call them out when they're not like, no. Did I say come in and grab your pet band binder and start blasting My Sharona? No. Go back. Do it again, or I'm going to give you lunch detention.
Right. Like, again, it comes back to, if they know what to expect, they're going to, there's been all kinds of studies about children, even, playing, and how kids play better in a fenced-in playground than they do in an open field, because
they need structure. They crave structure, whether they know it or not. They crave structure.
And they're gonna feel more safe if one day they do something and you don't say anything, and the next day they do the same thing and you come in and go off on them. That's not creating a safe space. That's gonna throw off their equilibrium. They're gonna be like, this teacher's a wild card. I'm going to always play it safe, or I'm going to completely act out to counterbalance that. If we want music classrooms that are creative and safe and collaborative, then we have to create that space and procedures. As much as we want it to be like, oh, this is music, we're just free and
and I struggle with, and I still to this day struggle with, I don't want to discipline kids. I don't like telling their parents they're doing a bad job. Like, that's not a joyful, fun thing for me to do, no matter how much the kids believe it or not. And so I really struggle with, like, well, I don't know, he wasn't that bad. I don't know if I, like, no.
Well, and so
like,
setting those kind of systems in place also frees you from that too. I was kind of thinking through, as you know, you should, kind of throughout the summer or even at the end of the school year. Okay, what am I going to do different next year? What am I going to do better next year? And I was just thinking about how, I really want to be better about, okay, give a warning, but then almost like the check system a little bit, but like, all right, if I've already given you one warning for talking to your neighbor, then the next time you're doing it, like, you've been reminded. So now, I'm gonna separate. Like, okay, like, you two need to switch spots. Like, we need to move away from each other. Or, and then at that point, and then really the third time is the like, okay, like, I'm gonna send your parents an email. And as a mom, I have learned so much how much I appreciate my kids' teachers communicating with me. And I know there are horror stories out there about parents being crazy, and that's not unwarranted.
That's gonna happen, unfortunately, and their parents are gonna be parents, and some parents don't trust you. I have gotten so much more positive reaction from a discipline notice being given to a kid of a parent like, hey, thank you so much for calling my kid out. He absolutely needs that.
Because,
Or, honestly, 8 out of 10 times they just don't respond.
But you've done your due diligence. And so whether that's with your administrator or whatever, because the first thing they're going to ask you, have you contacted the parents? And so you can be like, yeah. And then you can say, yeah, like, I've sent emails on this day, this day, this day, this day. And we've, to show that, like, we've had a pattern that you're on it. And, but so keeping track of that, I plan on, here at the beginning of the school year, sending out a welcome email to all of my kids' parents, in a mass email of just like, hey, I'm your kid's music teacher. I'm really excited. These are some of the things that you can look forward to them doing. Here are my classroom procedures. Work hard, be kind, make good music.
Simple, concise,
easy for them to remember. And so pretty much anything they're doing, like, are you working hard? Well, if you're flipped over in your chair, you're not working hard right now.
Make good choices. We say this a lot. Make good choices is like one of my favorite rules, because it just like covers mainly all of them. Like,
it is. But
are you chewing gum when you come into band?
But I think that's a conversation that needs to be had. Though. If you're gonna say make good choices, you need to define what a good choice is.
Even with your seniors, even with your high school band who you've seen for like 7 years now, because you've taught them all the way through elementary and whatnot. Like, have that conversation, because kids forget really easily, and it's like I usually start middle school and high school band. I read them my 15-page handbook of like, hey, I wrote this thing. I know you're not going to read it on your own, even though you're going to sign the paper. But we're going to go through this, and we're going to go through the rules so that, number one, I remember what I actually wrote and have in there. And I can say, no. We all read this. I don't care if you disagree with a rule or not, for whatever reason. We read this, we sat down, we talked about this. This is important.
Well, and you can take the opportunity too to answer questions and explain why these rules are in place, what's happening. That's my train of thought. It was there. It left me.
So, in our notes for this, we definitely had like, oh, teaching music. But as you can see, we have spent the entire time talking about rules and procedures and all these things because it is so incredibly
important. And it doesn't stop in August. If you set a procedure in place, it doesn't matter. In fact, the farther on you go in the school year, the more you may need to practice it. Like in May is practically August worked all over again.
Beginning of January.
Yeah, like, in those times, Christmas
after
time,
spring break.
like the week before Christmas break, the week before spring break, when they're more likely to be crazy, is not time for you to let up. It's time to go back. I remember very specifically, we went back to like, hey, welcome to music. I'm glad that you're here. Let's go ahead and look over our procedures real quick before we get started. By the way, remember, this is what's expected of you. And when the kids know what's expected and they know what the consequences for that are going to be, you are all going to have a happier time in music. And there is no shame. In fact, there is great benefit in using your class time to practice those procedures. And if that means that, and you do that through music, obviously, while we're making music, we're doing these things. I'm not saying that you're going to spend the entire class time talking at them.
Well,
but it's when we do this, we're going to do this. Okay, all right, let's stand up, let's get it going. Oh, let's practice that again.
First couple days, so for my like 7th and 8th grade band and 9th through 12th grade band, it's like day 1 and 2 is talking about rules. And then, like, okay, hey, we talked a lot about rules and how, like, all the bad things that can happen. Let's pick some music that's fun. And I do also, like, go back to the basics, too. Like, sure, like, we can play, Louie Louie from the Pet Band book because we know how to play that one and it sounds good and it feels good. Also, like, okay, hey, that chord was weird. Let's go back and go through that. Or... for a high school band, I use Lip Benders warm-up, which is a really clear, easy warm-up. Go through all of those and go through them very slowly. They're going to fight you on it. They're not going to want to do it. 7th and 8th grade band, we use the Essential Elements book as our method book. Go back to, like, exercise 1. Like, I don't care how fussy they are. Like, it's going to set you up for success. And it's going to put them in the mindset of, like, oh, how do I play my instrument again? Because they have not played that instrument for at least 2 months.
In choir, for me, like the first week is it's canons. We do things in rounds. We do lots of warm ups, lots of like singing healthily, and then we'll do. I have books of fun rounds and things that. We can start remembering our sight reading stuff. We can start remembering singing with good tone. We can play around with dynamics. We can start figuring out what our blend as an ensemble sounds like. And we're doing all of that. And then, I might throw them a piece or two just to like, hey, let's kind of start like listening to sight reading through some of our pieces we're getting ready for. But that first week of school it's about procedures, about getting to know your ensemble as an ensemble and as individuals. As people,
as musicians, as people. Yeah.
And that's a lot. That's a lot.
That's a lot
to think about for...
as you can tell, this was a longer episode than last time.
Because, man, classroom management and procedures
if you set it up well and you start immediately, don't play the game of like, oh, it's like the first week of school. I'll give you... No. Like, I don't care. Unless you're like a kindergartner or a first grader, then like, okay, I might, obviously like tailor that experience. But like 5th grade, 4th grade and beyond, like, no, you've done this before.
2nd grade and beyond, like
really,
they know how to do school. It's just reminding them how to do school. So
like, sure, it's a reminder.
You know what to do.
But like, if you're making if you're causing problems in my classroom.
So we're gonna come in, we're gonna practice these procedures, and then we're gonna get going. So.
And you don't have to yell, you don't have to scream and stop, and in fact, that's much more ineffective.
Right. Again, we're not gonna be emotional about it. because we've set these things in place.
It's just very, it's gentle parenting. It's gentle
All right.
parenting.
Okay, I see that, like, all right, you had your warning, you're still talking, I'm going to have you move over here, and that's a lunch detention. That's it, and we're moving on.
And I see this a lot on TikTok too.
That was 4 seconds of class time.
Like, a lot of teachers who are also parents compare teaching to gentle parenting. Like, that's what it is. It's a, like, I'm not going to scream and yell. I'm not going to physically harm you. I'm not going to make a big deal. But, like, and your feelings are valid. Like, you might be mad that I'm asking you to not talk even though I'm trying to lead class right now.
Mm-hmm.
However, like, this is what we need to do, and this is how to show respect in this situation.
Yep.
All right.
You got this.
Small.town music on Instagram. Smalltown music podcast at gmail.com
Yeah.
for our email. YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts.
All the things.
Like, subscribe, rate, comment.
So let us know if there's something that you love. Maybe there's something we haven't thought of. If there's a system that you love, things that you've learned about classroom management, or maybe you have a situation that you don't know how to handle. Let us know.
Yeah.
And we'll do our best to help out.
We check our emails a lot. So seriously, like, we're going to respond to you. We're going to be really excited that you send us an email.
Yeah. Email, comment.
Maybe we'll send you something, a freebie, if you email us.
Ooh, swag. We need swag.
We do.
All right. Bye.